Long-haul driving operates on a different timeline than most work. A shift might cover 800 miles, 12 hours behind the wheel, 5 states crossed before sunrise. The decisions that matter on these routes aren't sudden. They accumulate. A driver leaving a distribution center in Ohio at 9 p.m. faces roughly 400 small choices before reaching a depot in Georgia the next morning. Most of those choices happen in darkness, on roads where the next services might be 60 miles ahead. What's unusual about long routes is how they compress decision-making into patterns. Not because the work is repetitive, but because uncertainty on these roads has predictable shapes. Weather changes, traffic thins out, fuel gets low, equipment behaves differently at 3 a.m. than it does at 3 p.m. This isn't about emergencies. It's about the continuous mental load of managing variables that shift slowly but never stop shifting. Night highways create a specific sensory environment. Visibility drops to what headlights reveal. That's roughly 500 feet on low beams, maybe 800 on high beams if there's no oncoming traffic. Everything outside that cone exists as memory or assumption. Sound changes too. Engine noise becomes the baseline. Wind patterns shift depending on speed and load weight. A loaded trailer sounds different at 65 miles per hour than an empty one does. Drivers use these sounds to monitor equipment without looking at gauges constantly. Temperature matters more than most people expect. Cab heaters run differently when it's 20 degrees outside versus 50. Tire pressure shifts with temperature. Brake performance changes. A driver leaving warm conditions and heading into cold ones adjusts following distance before conscious thought kicks in. It becomes reflex. The routine of long routes is built around intervals. Fuel stops happen every 400 to 500 miles, depending on tank size and load weight. Rest breaks follow federal mandates, 30 minutes after 8 hours of driving. But actual fatigue doesn't follow a schedule. Drivers learn to recognize when attention starts drifting, which isn't the same as feeling tired. Most long-haul drivers develop pre-route habits. They check specific things in a specific order: tire condition, lights, cargo securement, fluid levels. This isn't nervousness. It's reducing variables before the route starts, because once underway, options narrow quickly. GPS systems provide routing, but experienced drivers don't follow them blindly. They know which rest areas have adequate parking after midnight, which way stations stay open late, which stretches of highway lose cell signal. That knowledge doesn't come from apps. It comes from repetition. Night driving also means reduced communication. Dispatch centers operate with skeleton crews after midnight. Other drivers are focused on their own routes. Radio chatter drops off. For hours at a time, decisions happen in isolation. There's no one to consult, no second opinion available. The driver is the only decision maker in their environment. This isolation creates a particular kind of focus. Distractions drop away. The mental space narrows to the road, the load, the timeline. Some drivers find this clarity useful, others find it draining. Either way, it's the environment they work in. Decision pressure on long routes doesn't arrive suddenly. It builds through accumulation. Consider fuel management. A driver leaves with a full tank, knowing they have maybe 7 hours of range. 3 hours in, they pass a truck stop. Fuel isn't critical yet, but the next services are 90 miles ahead. Stop now and lose 15 minutes, but guarantee fuel access. Keep going and stay on schedule, but accept tighter margins later. The decision depends on factors that aren't obvious from outside the work. Current traffic speed, weather forecast for the next 2 hours, whether the load is time-sensitive, how the driver feels physically, whether this route has reliable fuel options ahead or whether services are sparse. Experienced drivers make this choice in seconds, not because it's simple, but because they've weighted these variables hundreds of times. They know that stopping early costs time but preserves options. They know that pushing through can work, but only if conditions stay stable. They know that fuel decisions compound. If you skip one stop, the next decision gets harder. This pattern repeats across different domains: route selection, speed management, when to take breaks. Each decision reduces future flexibility slightly. Miss a turn and the reroute might add 30 miles. Push through fatigue for another hour and reaction time degrades. Pull over for unscheduled rest and the delivery window gets tighter. What makes long routes different from shorter work is the duration of consequences. A local driver making a poor decision can often recover within an hour. A long-haul driver might live with the consequences for 6 hours before reaching a point where options reopen. This creates a specific mental discipline. Drivers learn to think 2 or 3 decisions ahead, not constantly, but when variables change. If weather deteriorates, they start considering alternate routes before current conditions force it. If traffic slows unexpectedly, they recalculate fuel needs before the gauge becomes critical. Another pressure point is timeline management. Most long routes have delivery windows, not just delivery dates. Arrive too early, and the facility might not accept the load until the scheduled time. Arrive late, and penalties apply, or worse, the driver loses their next load assignment. This means maintaining average speed over hundreds of miles. Not moment-to-moment speed, but overall pace. A driver who runs slightly under the speed limit for 3 hours can't easily make up that time later without violating hours of service regulations. The math is unforgiving. Drivers develop internal pacing systems. They note mile markers at key points. They track when they cross state lines. They use landmarks they've seen on previous runs. This isn't obsessive monitoring. It's maintaining awareness of whether they're ahead, behind, or on schedule without constant calculation. Equipment issues add another layer. A truck might develop a minor problem: slight vibration, odd sound, warning light. Stopping to investigate costs time. Continuing risks turning a small problem into a larger one. The driver has to assess severity without diagnostic tools, often in poor lighting, sometimes in bad weather. Most choose to continue unless the issue is obvious. This isn't recklessness, it's probability assessment based on experience. Most odd sounds are benign. Most warning lights are sensor errors, but some aren't. The decision is essentially, does this problem have a higher probability of worsening in the next 2 hours than the cost of stopping to check it? Wrong choices in either direction have costs. Stop unnecessarily, and you burn schedule margin. Push through a developing failure, and you might end up disabled on a highway shoulder at 2 a.m., waiting hours for roadside assistance. Certain knowledge on long routes never appears in training manuals or company protocols. It transfers through experience and observation. One rule: always know where the truck will fit. Not just lanes, entire environments. Some rest areas look adequate on maps but have tight turning radii that make exit difficult with a 53-foot trailer. Some truck stops have fuel islands that work fine for day cabs but create problems for sleeper cabs with extended wheelbases. Drivers learn these details through repetition or through watching other drivers struggle. Another rule: don't trust that other vehicles see you, particularly after midnight, particularly in rural areas. Car drivers on empty highways often don't expect trucks. They change lanes without checking mirrors. They slow down abruptly. Night shift drivers maintain following distances that look excessive in theory, but account for other drivers' reduced attention. There's also a rule about electronic systems. Use them, but verify. GPS routing is usually correct, but not always. It might route a truck onto a bridge with weight restrictions. It might suggest a shortcut through residential streets. It might indicate a rest area that closed 2 years ago. Drivers cross-check against their own knowledge of the route or against information from other drivers. Communication with other trucks follows unwritten protocols too. Flashing headlights can mean different things depending on context. On 2-lane highways, it often signals that it's safe to merge back after passing. On interstates, it might warn of police ahead or road hazards. There's no standardized system, but patterns emerge through regional practice. Parking strategy is another area where experience teaches what training doesn't. Arriving at a rest area at 11 p.m. usually means spaces are available. Arriving at 2 a.m. might mean everything's full, because that's when drivers who left evening shifts reach their mandatory rest periods. Knowing this, experienced drivers either arrive before the rush or plan alternate stops. Weather decisions also rely heavily on unwritten knowledge. Official forecasts provide general conditions, but they don't tell you how a specific stretch of highway handles in freezing rain. Some roads are treated early and remain passable. Some aren't treated until morning. Some have microclimates that create black ice even when surrounding areas are clear. This information exists in driver experience, not in weather apps. There's a principle about mechanical problems too. Small issues that appear repeatedly are more concerning than large issues that appear once. A single warning light might be a sensor glitch. The same warning appearing, disappearing, and reappearing suggests something genuinely wrong. Drivers learn to track patterns rather than react to individual incidents. Another guideline involves timing around urban areas. Passing through a major city at 1 a.m. versus 5 a.m. creates completely different conditions. At 1 a.m., highways are mostly clear. At 5 a.m., early commuters appear, and traffic patterns become unpredictable. If a driver has flexibility in their schedule, they time city passages for dead hours, even if it means pausing the route for an hour beforehand. Following these patterns and principles affects efficiency and safety in measurable ways. Drivers who manage fuel conservatively arrive with predictable margins. They're rarely scrambling for the last open truck stop. They're not running on fumes hoping the next exit has services. This consistency means they maintain schedule reliability, which affects load assignments and income over time. Route familiarity reduces stress and decision fatigue. A driver running the same corridor repeatedly knows where congestion typically occurs, where construction zones persist, where services are reliable. They make fewer navigation errors. They spend less mental energy evaluating options because they've already learned what works. Proper spacing from other vehicles reduces the frequency of hard braking. This matters for fuel economy, but it also matters for load stability and brake wear. A driver who maintains consistent following distance might save thousands in maintenance costs over a year, simply by avoiding wear from constant braking and acceleration. Sleep timing affects everything else. Drivers who align rest breaks with natural fatigue patterns rather than arbitrary schedules maintain better attention. Those who push through tiredness to meet schedules often end up taking longer to complete basic tasks later in the route, negating any time saved. Equipment monitoring catches problems early. A driver who notices unusual tire wear during a pre-trip inspection avoids a blowout 6 hours into the route. That difference might be between a scheduled tire replacement and a roadside emergency with towing costs, missed delivery, and lost revenue. Communication patterns also matter. Drivers who maintain contact with dispatch about changing conditions can get rerouted before problems become critical. Those who wait until a problem is severe often find their options have narrowed to only bad choices. When patterns aren't followed, consequences appear gradually, then suddenly. Skipping fuel stops works until it doesn't. Ignoring equipment warnings works until a component fails. Pushing past fatigue works until attention lapses at exactly the wrong moment. The work doesn't forgive accumulated small errors. A driver who makes slightly poor decisions consistently might not face immediate problems, but over months, patterns emerge. More delays, more mechanical issues, more missed delivery windows. The work compounds both good practices and poor ones. Long routes compress decision-making into repeating patterns because the environment demands it. Distance creates isolation. Time creates pressure. Darkness reduces information. The decisions that matter aren't dramatic. They're continuous assessments of variables that shift slowly: fuel levels, energy levels, weather conditions, traffic density, equipment performance. What experience teaches is pattern recognition, not just what to do, but when something falls outside normal parameters, when a familiar sound changes slightly, when traffic thins out earlier than expected, when fatigue arrives sooner than usual. The logic of these routes makes sense primarily to people who work them. An outsider watching might not recognize the decisions being made, because most decisions look like simply continuing to drive. But inside the work, every hour contains dozens of small choices that affect what's possible in the hours ahead. These aren't instincts. They're learned patterns based on repeated exposure to similar conditions. The work continues because people develop systems that account for uncertainty without requiring constant conscious thought. The systems work until conditions change. Then adjustment happens. Then the systems resume. That's what long routes teach about decision pressure. Not that choices are always high stakes, but that they're continuous, accumulating, and largely invisible from outside the work itself.